Coach Bryan Harsin's first signature win of his time at Auburn is in hand, and so now it's time to move on to the next week, which means another press conference where we maybe take a little bit of a look back at the LSU game, but also look ahead to UGA. We'll talk about the questions that were asked, his responses, and our analysis of it. My name is Kyle, the owner and editor of the E2C Network, where the Auburn family speaks. Our content here and on our podcast network may tend to be Auburn sports heavy, but if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. If you're new to this channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button along with the notification bell so you never miss any content. Thank you to members of our booster club like Joe Rudolph who help produce videos like this. I always want to remind you before we start these type of videos that it's best to go and check out the whole press conference for yourself so you can hear all the questions and responses in their proper context and not just take my word for it. And this is just, as I always say, my speculation and, analysis of what I'm hearing and maybe sometimes reading into the responses and the questions that I'm hearing. With that being said, I always try to kind of come away with these press conferences, maybe 1, 2, or 3 things that really stuck out to me that I really want to draw your attention to. And I do have those this time. I will admit, though, one of these has got a little bit of speculation. The other is really big speculation on our part. So I'm going to say that right up front here. But the one thing that I keep hearing a lot of, not just in this press conference from Coach Harsin, but many others, is the dropping of passes by the wide receivers. And so if you kind of take this statement that he made several times throughout the press conference, and I should admit he even called out the tight ends at one point about dropping passes, and he did compliment all of them as well, just said that that's something that's really got to be cleaned up at some point because we got to have more consistency from those positions. But if you look back at this press conference and the past press conference, he's been talking about a lot of these things, doing things with consistency, with purpose. And I think it's really starting to build the narrative that maybe the right decision was made by letting Cornelius Williams go as the wide receiver coach. Again, we're still very, early in the time since he's gone, so I think it's still a bit of a step out to say that. But I think the narrative is starting to support that, especially if you listen really closely to what Coach Harsin is saying. Here's the big speculation, and it's about Tank. And there's been a lot of talk, and there's even a question that's asked in the press conference about, is something going on with him? And a lot of us have been asking that and wondering because we're not seeing the same production, the same amount of carries from him, and just not the same amount of running going on right now with Auburn's offense. There was a statement that was made by Coach Harsin during his press conference, which kind of stuck out to me. And I'm paraphrasing here, so forgive me. He said, but maybe a player having had a great year last year needs to step up and take that next step this year as well because now everybody's paying attention to him. Now, again, he wasn't really talking about running backs or anybody in particular during this point, but I'm trying real hard to listen closely to what Coach is saying amongst all the coach speak that they all do, and I'm starting to think that this is leaning in the direction of Tank. That may be a big step out on my part, but I really think that's kind of what he's directing toward, if not other people as well. So those are my 2 bigger takeaways, just kind of that stuck out to me from the press conference. Let's talk about some of the things that were said. As always, he has an opening statement, and he complimented how the team responded about getting back from LSU from a late game in unorthodox schedules and how they've kind of started the week off. It's a great thing to hear that they've started a very important week off in the right way. Also talked about his players for the game, which you've probably seen on social media. Bo Nix, the whole defense, which I thought was a little bit interesting. Keandre Jones, Colby Wooden, and Joko Willis. All very deserving, all very good candidates for being players of the game. Of course, he addressed some of the things that we're wondering about UGA and called them complete in all 3 phases of the game and said they are consistency, which is one of his favorite words, across the board. He's unsure of the quarterback situation at the moment, as we all are, but is impressed with what both J.T. Daniels can do, but also Stetson Bennett. If you remember, Stetson Bennett had a pretty good time, or that wasn't a debut, but a pretty good time against Auburn the last time he saw him. He pointed attention to their last performance, especially defensively. My big question, though, is was that more of Arkansas not being as good as advertised, or just is Georgia that good? We're about to find out real quick the answer to that question. Not that this is really important, but these were very brief opening statements as compared to his other ones. And I think that comes from he knew there was going to be a lot of questions, obvious questions asked throughout this thing, whether it was Bo's performance or things like that. So just wanted to get right into it maybe. He was asked how you deal with the depth and the talent that UGA just seems to reload with every single year. He said you just can't give up just because they have good players. Everybody's got good players. There's a continuation of focusing on our own preparation is what Coach Harsin said. We've already kind of addressed this, but he was asked about the status of 2 players specifically early on, Tank and Owen Pappoe. We've already kind of talked about the Tank thing, but he said, no, Tank's fine. So that was kind of a short and sweet and to-the-point answer. He did say that they had hoped that Owen would be able to play, which is why he traveled with the team, because I think, as most of you know, if you travel with the team, you're pretty much expected to play. So I think that was kind of a game-time decision, and they'll see later on in the week if he'll be ready to go. He was asked about the importance of the tight ends to the game of football, but obviously to his own scheme. Again, he did point out that the tight ends, along with the wide receivers, need to clean up a few of the drops they had, but how crucial that they have been, especially players like Shanker, and then obviously giving a lot of props to Tyler Fromm and what was a breakout game for him. But he also transitioned this question into making statements about a lot of the other players in their performance. One in particular was Shaun Shivers. And what stuck out to me, if you just listen to Coach Harsin, was how much he glowed when he talked about Shaun Shivers. I know that's a weird word to use, glowed, but it's really the best thing that came to mind. To me, he's a coach's dream. When you talk about his desire and his energy that he brings out there, I can only imagine what it's like for practice too, because he's just that guy who loves to play football, a coach's dream. He was asked about the need to get off to a good start, and the reporter even pointed out that in the last 3 games, they had been trailing in the first half. Coach Harsin said that they really do need to be doing a better job of that, got to start faster, but it's not even just that. You have to play through all 4 quarters. Can't just count on those 3 quarters you getting back in the game. He did say that they've done a great job of responding and getting themselves back in the game, but it's not a formula for success. Again, alluding back to my 2 points at the beginning of this video, he addressed preparation, discipline issues, even kind of made some statements like you can tell who's ready to come into the team meetings, who's already jotting down notes, asking questions, raising their hand, and the guys that you're having to remind to take out their notebooks and things like that. Not saying that's necessarily Tank or anyone in particular, but again, I'm starting to see a narrative form here that I'm starting to kind of question myself. The big question on everybody's mind was asked, how do we continue to build off Bo's strength, which is clearly his ability to make plays and scramble around? He did point out that, and just like most teams, but they specifically every year will install a scramble drill and really work on not just the quarterback, but the rest of the units as well. What do you do in these situations when it breaks down? Doesn't matter who the quarterback is, you have to install this and prepare for it because it's going to happen. So he didn't say there's necessarily like anything specific they do, but there is kind of a structure for what the wide receivers should do in this certain instance, or the offensive line, or things like that. He was asked specifically about how to combat that powerful front 7 of UGA. Coach Harsin pointed out players like Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis are going to be really hard to make a difference on, but was reminded that we've seen defenses and defensive fronts like this at Penn State, LSU, and even said Georgia State as well, which they clearly loaded up the box. The best way you can do that is to find a way to win your one-on-ones. It all falls back on how you prepare throughout the week. Very brief here, was asked about TD Moultrie's status, and he said he was unsure at this point and just wanted to leave it at that. Obviously very vague and remains with a lot of questions there, but we'll just leave it at that as well for now. He was asked about the defensive slow starts, but the second half adjustments, and talked about how Coach Mason and staff have been really good at communicating, and specifically in the second half, about what really needs to change. He said that the opposing offenses are going to make plays, but it really matters if we can get it right or not. And so far, in these big instances, they've been able to do that. He said really it just comes down to the players and the staff truly knowing the scheme so they can fall back on that. He was asked about if they're going to be planning for Bennett and Daniels all at the same time, almost 2 separate game plans. We got this question kind of similarly last week, and again, he didn't really scoff at it, but he just said, again, there's one game plan, but you do have to tweak things if a certain quarterback comes in and has different assets. And lastly, he was asked about some of the players that aren't necessarily new, but were new for this season in terms of sticking out and just having bigger moments than they've had earlier on in the season. Those were Iku Leota and Jalen Simpson. Coach Harsin said Iku helped the defensive front out a lot because it's providing security, but also depth at that position that has been sorely needed, especially in the situations that we saw arising with the LSU game, with having a lot of players out for that game. He was complimentary of Simpson and said that staying with the receiver throughout the game was something that really stuck out to him, that he did really well. And speaking more generally, he even pointed out that if you're playing well, that helps the competition on the team, which is ultimately going to help this team get better. So that's just my general thoughts about the questions that were asked, his answers to them, and my overall analysis and speculation on what was said throughout the press conference. I want to hear from you now. Let me know what you thought about all these things, especially if you've seen the whole press conference yourself. Keep the conversation going down there in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this type of content, please help support it by smashing that like button. And if you want more content, be sure to hit the subscribe button along with that notification bell so you never miss an upload or a live stream. Check out the ways to help support our content in the description, such as joining the Booster Club or becoming a channel member here. Thank you for tuning into the E2C Network, where the Auburn family speaks. War Eagle.